Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko, talking all things Steelers. Okay, Brian, let's talk about the awards night. And there is a lot of hoopla right now going on from Steelers fans. And I think that there's a lot of justification behind hoopla when you get Myles Garrett winning Defensive Player of the Year over TJ Watt, despite TJ Watt having 5 more sacks, 6 more quarterback hits, 2 more tackles for loss, scoring a defensive touchdown, breaking up passes, getting an interception, pressuring the quarterback by a much higher rate. 85 total pressures to 76 if you consider Sports Information Systems. Pro Football Reference has it 13 more pressures. I think that it's an interesting topic to go over why something like this happened, because it would be different if Myles Garrett had like 1 or 2 less sacks than TJ Watt and did all these other things on top of that, and like their stats were jumbled up in 2 different things. When you look down across the board, the only thing that you can give Myles Garrett is that, according to Pro Football Focus and just their stats, when you look at others, that he has a better pass rush productivity rate, which is a stat that they kind of come up with on their own. But like, I subscribe to Sports Information Systems, and they even have TJ Watt pressuring the quarterback more often, winning in pass rush stats more often. It seems like the whole argument for Myles Garrett comes from these stats that come from one outlet that provides advanced data on the NFL, and I don't see it coming from anywhere else. Do you feel like there's more logic behind the whole Myles Garrett argument than other than those numbers that keep getting provided whenever this discussion comes up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a contextual thing too, and you can't just use numbers for everybody who's going to say stats don't lie. You can go talk to Cam Heyward about the position that he plays and why, he says stats often do lie, because you need to know what his responsibilities are on a given play. You need to know, is he being doubled or even triple teamed because of how disruptive he is? Now, that's not quite the same comparison of a D tackle to an outside linebacker. Myles Garrett is an edge rusher as well, but slightly different alignments. He's got his hand in the ground for the most part. TJ Watt is standing up, rushing. And here's what I always say to this, Chris. Would I have voted TJ Watt for AP Defensive Player of the Year? Yes, I would have. I have a PFWA vote. I used it on TJ Watt. He didn't win the award from that outlet either, but I acknowledge that I watch him every single week. I watch him wreak havoc and dominate every single game from the press box. I don't watch Myles Garrett every week. So, it's sort of easy for me to use that and then say, oh yeah, the numbers back me up on this too. How can this guy not be the Defensive Player of the Year? I don't shout down anybody who has an argument for Garrett, because I do think they're often based in, stuff that goes beyond the traditional counting numbers. The way that he didn't generate much in terms of the box score at the end of the season, that's cause for concern too. But I would also keep in mind that, hey, the playoff game, these awards are regular season awards. You kind of have to throw that out. Yes, the Browns were bad in that one and he didn't do much, but Micah Parsons from the Cowboys, he was 3rd in the running. He also kind of took a flamethrower to people on Twitter last night and said Myles Garrett had a better season than TJ Watt and has been the better player. That's one of his peers saying that too. So it's not just dumb sports writers who are at this thing, which I usually bristle at when these kind of things come up. So, it's hard for me to imagine anybody, is more valuable to his defense than TJ Watt. But I don't know exactly what Myles Garrett does to rip up offensive game plans that maybe TJ doesn't. It's subjective. It really is. If you're going to sit here and just really pound the table by saying stats don't lie, numbers don't lie, well, then I don't ever want to hear you make an argument that Troy Polamalu was a better safety than Ed Reid, because Ed Reid has way more interceptions than Troy Polamalu. So that's just a slippery slope to go down. People are always going to want to be mad about something. Steelers Nation's very protective of their little TJ Watt, and TJ himself seemed miffed about it too, considering he, in his words, was playing hooky last night at the awards show, which also meant he wasn't there for teammate Cam Heyward to bring home the Walter Payton Man of the Year award, which I wish we would spend more time on, because that's an honor that a Steelers player won and was well deserved, and not one that a Steelers player did not win.
And we'll get to that in a minute. I don't think the safety comparison holds up, because Polamalu and Reid, they line up. When you're a safety, you line up on so many different positions. When you're an edge rusher, you line up on
Myles
the
Garrett lines up in different gaps as well, Chris. So it's
right,
to me, it can hold up.
Okay, but he's always at the line of scrimmage, and you have equal opportunity to create pressure at the line of scrimmage.
TJ Watt drops more often than Myles Garrett. He gets interceptions by dropping into coverage because of his
and he drops more often than Myles Garrett, and yet still gets better production against in his pass rushing, which I think again goes toward the idea that he's more productive and he's a better player at rushing the quarterback than Myles Garrett, which, if that's Myles Garrett's one quality and he doesn't have the other thing going for him, that kind of shows that. I think that's another argument for TJ Watt in that conversation. But again, when you're talking about,
and I'll use a different comparison. Let's do Ben Roethlisberger versus a whole bunch of quarterbacks that Steelers fans would say, no, Ben is way better than this guy. I mean, if you want to just go by passing yards, there's going to be people probably above him that your dyed-in-the-wool Steeler supporters would say.
I mean, I think name a quarterback, and I'll run with you on that, because I think that there's plenty of quarterbacks that have higher numbers than Ben Roethlisberger that are better than him, or don't have higher numbers that number than him because of the eras that they played in. But I'm just my point is that
Drew Brees. I think a lot of Steelers fans think Ben was better than Drew Brees, but Drew Brees.
I think there's definitely an argument for Drew Brees in that situation. Yeah. But again, my whole thing is, it would be different if Myles Garrett had one or two less sacks than TJ Watt, or if he had more tackles for loss, if he was clearly more impactful in the run game, and he wasn't. He didn't have more tackles. And for anyone that wants to use double team rates and unblocked sacks or anything like that, Myles Garrett had just as many unblocked sacks this year as TJ Watt, according to Sports Information Systems. And they're describing there that the double team rates weren't exactly as unbalanced as some people make them out to be. I think TJ Watt is, if you're looking at disruptiveness, if you're trying to create some formula for that, I think TJ Watt is just as disruptive as Myles Garrett. He's just also a lot more productive than Myles Garrett. So if I think that's the route that conversation, if we stay objective there, that's the direction that it goes. And I don't see a logical reasoning for Myles Garrett to get the award, other than you were tired of seeing Watts win it because JJ Watt had won it 3 times and TJ Watt had already won it once. But
I really don't buy into that. I don't know. I just don't think that.
I mean, I don't have another reason. Like we've been told all the time, stats are what matter, production's what matter, and TJ Watt even played on a defense that allowed less points than the Browns. So, I even take out an account of the playoff loss that they lost by. They got 45 points dropped on them in that game. I looked out throughout the regular season, TJ Watt, more sacks, more pressures, more tackles for loss, more interceptions, more passes swatted at the line of scrimmage. I don't know. If production isn't supposed to be what we measure guys by, then there can be a lot of subjectivity. There was a person who voted Dexter Lawrence to be, in the defensive player of the year running last night, and I don't understand how that's vote. So, but third place, I don't know, shouldn't have been fifth place.
Well, that's going to be the natural divide between the people who are like, oh, well, you're just a box score watcher, and I'm over here devouring the film. I can't watch all 32 teams, film wise. So I don't have a great feel for what Dexter Lawrence was doing that transcends the stat line. You know what I mean? But clearly somebody out there is going to have strong feelings about that.
If film devourer here, no, that doesn't make any sense. And the box score
crushing the Giants tape, Chris.
I mean, I watched around the league, and I've seen Dexter Lawrence play this year, and I didn't watch every game that he played, but he wasn't better than.
Maybe he got a vote from a Giants beat writer who does. I don't know.
Maybe. My point is that there was a lot of that didn't make much sense there, and I think there's very little room for the argument for it, and it kind of brings into question the objectivity of the voting system as it is right now. But like I said, I wanted to get to the Walter Payton Man of the Year award, which Cam Heyward did win, and this is an award. How many years has he been nominated for this now?
This was his 6th nomination for it, 3rd year in a row. I mean, obviously he's been a powerhouse for the Steelers in terms of his community commitment and everything he does off the field. It hasn't even been close. They've had other nominees in recent years, Vance McDonald, Marquise Pouncey, but Cam's been the gold standard for quite some time now, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, he's been a guy who's been out there. And I think part of what helps Cam Heyward too is that he not only does the great community stuff, he's not only the great person and a great player, but like I think Cam Heyward is doing one of the best jobs of NFL players who are getting ready to transition out of their career into media. Not saying that Cam Heyward's done after this season, but you know, you look at like what Jason Kelsey's been doing with his New Heights podcast with Travis. I mean, that's like the gold standard. He has like the best podcast or the most listened to podcast in football right now, and he's crushing it. But Cam Heyward, you know, started his own show, and it doesn't like, you know, do booming numbers that break records or anything.
He needs Connor Heyward to start dating one of the preeminent pop stars in America, and then I think that those views will shoot way up.
Connor Heyward dates Dua Lipa, and then it just blows up from there. But in all seriousness, like I think that a big part of what helps Cam is that he does so much work to reach out into the community, both via his efforts and via media with his podcast, and also just being everywhere. Like, you know, Cam Heyward's a guy that we've given him the Chief Award, as writers for what he's done with us, because he's always open to talking. Cam Heyward was the first Steeler player I ever talked to after a loss, and it was after that Bears loss when Villanueva saluted, and the Steelers were really ticked about that and losing in overtime. And like and I saw how angry he was. And when I spoke to him, I was like, oh, this is going to be my first angry Steeler I've talked to in the locker room. And he handles it so professionally every time, win or lose. And I think that's where he's exemplified that, but also the work that he's done in the community. I think that this is a guy who's gone 3 extra miles. I mean, people say go to the extra miles, you can triple that. And that's kind of what Cam Heyward has done over the years to be this guy and earn this award.
Yeah, and it's just a cherry on top too that he's actually from here originally. Was born in Pittsburgh. We know his dad, the late Ironhead Heyward, not from Pittsburgh, but played at Pitt. Was a star for the Panthers, and married Charlotte Heyward from Highland Park. So I mean, it's just a cool story from that perspective for both him and the franchise. And I really feel like pretty much anybody in the community here can feel a sense of pride and accomplishment in Cam, and he's been an exemplary Steeler for sure, not just for what he does off the field, but you mentioned sort of being the nice guy all the time in the locker room too, leadership, and I'll just say on the field, because that is a component of Walter Payton. Even though it wasn't his best season, the guy always plays 110%. That's probably contributing to some of his body breaking down at this point at age 34, but it's hard to find a Steeler who plays harder than he does, chasing after the ball, eating up blocks. Yeah, eating up blocks at the line of scrimmage. He does everything right in that regard for sure.
He's exemplified. Like, there's guys who I think you like a title called Mr. Steeler could apply to. When you're the guy that carries Franco Harris's flag out of the locker room, just a couple days after Franco Harris has passed away, like you're forever locked in there. I think this is an interesting question here. The Hall of Fame class was announced last night. Does Cam Heyward ever get in the Hall of Fame?
Can't we just let him have his Walter Payton moment? I mean, always got to spin it forward. And because I thought you were initially going to go to like, well, here's an interesting question. Like, will Cam Heyward ever win a playoff game again, let alone a Super Bowl, which that's not looking great either. I don't even really want to get into all that. Let's save that for an off-season show where we have nothing to talk about.
I was just saying, we're talking about how great the guy is and how awesome he was for so many years. Would he get in that conversation? He's obviously going in a Ring of Honor.
Let's bring it back up in like March or April instead of doing mock draft 73.6 or something like that.
Buddy, we're going to do a mock draft 173.6. Yeah. So you better get ready for that. But anyways, we got to switch topics. When we come back, we'll talk about not just the Super Bowl, who's going to win, but what the Steelers can learn from some of these Super Bowl teams. That and more here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. We'll be right back. Back here in the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko, talking to you Steelers here. So everyone's going to talk about, who they think is going to win the Chiefs Niners. I think the Niners are favored by 2.5 right now. And that's all fine and good. But Brian had this idea of a topic, and I thought this was a good one. What can the Steelers learn from either of these teams and how they play right now? And I think that's an interesting way to look at this, because these are two teams that can that do several things really well right now. Like, the Chiefs, for all of the talk that's going to be about Patrick Mahomes, their defense is why they're at the Super Bowl again this year. They were the number 2 defense all season long. They played very well, and they were very good in the playoffs. They were able to limit the Bills for a time to hold on to that lead. They were able to shut down the Dolphins. They completely limited Lamar Jackson and the Ravens in a game that, a lot of people had the Ravens going in and doing what they had done all year long. And you look at how they're constructed. They have good corners, good athletic linebackers, a really tough defensive front. They've done a lot of things right this year when it comes to that. And I wonder is the biggest thing you want to take from the Chiefs, if you wanted to take one thing from the Chiefs and apply it on the Steelers, is it how their defense comes together? Or is there something else that's still on the offense that intrigues you about how the Chiefs got here again?
So it's kind of both. It's more about how they've been built. I'm going to say late round picks matter. Day 3 draft picks matter. I mean, first of all, when is the last time the Steelers hit on a day 3 pick? I mean, Dan Moore Jr. has been a starter, and yet I don't know that a lot of people would consider that a hit. Kevin Dotson, kind of similar, and they were both 4th rounders. Jury's out on Nick Herbig. We'll see. Calvin Austin, we'll see. The 2 most recent 4th round guys. But man, I mean, you look at the Chiefs, Chris. Trey Smith, who's been on their offensive line starting for the last 3 years, he was a 6th round guy out of Tennessee. Isaiah Pacheco was a 7th round pick. Jalen Watson plays a lot for them at corner, 7th round pick. Like, if I'm the Steelers, we got to stop throwing away these kind of end of the draft. And obviously no one's trying to do that. You're not trying to misevaluate a player or, not develop somebody. But I think too often you just get stuck in this mindset of like, yeah, why not? Chris Oladokun, who cares? It's the 2nd, 7th round pick. Probably won't make the team anyway. Just look at what the Chiefs are doing to sort of get contributions from people who are on not just rookie contracts, but cheap rookie contracts. I think that matters. I think that can help you get over the top in the NFL. And obviously it's all kind of window dressing when you have Mahomes at quarterback, but these guys are contributing to winning in a way that Steelers day 3 draft choices simply have not been in recent years.
I think it's a very interesting point there about that, because, the Steelers have had smaller contributions from guys like Trey Nord brought help on special teams, but he wasn't, bigly impactful the way that Isaiah Pacheco had been. They tried to get Presley Harvin, at punter. If Presley Harvin's a better punter, not that wins you a whole bunch more games or anything like that, but at least protects this offense that had been struggling a little bit more. They've missed there. Kevin Dotson was the one player who I think you could say, like, hey, talent-wise, they found something there. They just didn't make it work on their own roster, and now they have an extra draft pick because of him, but it's also a day 3 draft pick, which they still have to hit on. And yeah, you're right.
Do they have an extra pick, or they just got an earlier pick?
They got an earlier pick. That's right. But they switched it into like they now have 2 back-to-back 4th round picks. Yeah. But point being, they now have a 4th round, 2 4th round picks at their disposal this year to have a better rate at that. And when you look at it, last year they only had 3 day 3 picks. They had a 4th and 2 7ths. And, like you said, we still got to see how Nick Herbig develops. He certainly, for a rookie who, played as few snaps as he did, he was very productive in those snaps. And Corey Trice, got injured before the season even started. I'd say Connor Hayward's doing well for a 3rd string tight end right now, but again, we're talking about guys who are starting and helping you win games right now in more than just a couple plays here and there. And that is something where the Steelers could kind of take from the Chiefs and say, hey, let's start hitting on these. And also, I'll say this, this is also just the 2nd year where Omar Khan and his staff will have to draft guys. And last year, all he had was 1 4th and 2 7ths in the day 3 picks. I do think it'll be interesting to see how they use them this year compared to how they did in years before. Like you said, Oladokun and guys like that didn't work out. Let's talk about the Niners real quick. What have they done that has impressed you the most this year? Because their defense has a ton of big names on it, and they weren't as productive. They weren't as productive as a defense as the Chiefs were this year. Instead, I think it was their offense that truly impressed me, and I think their offense is a lot closer to what the Steelers want to do with their offense than the Chiefs and what they do.
So I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction for this one too, because again, it would be easy to say, yeah, you should go find an all-pro quarterback a Pro Bowl quarterback with the last pick of the draft. Every team should do that if you can handle that, like Brock Purdy. But no, I'm going to say just looking at the Chiefs and kind of the Niners and how they operate. I was counting this up today, Chris. I think the Steelers had 19 coaches on their staff last season, including Matt Canada. So that dropped by one after he got fired midseason. Unless I'm missing something with some of these people's roles during games and whatnot and titles, the 49ers have 28 coaches. They've got, and Kyle Shanahan's kind of an interesting case because he's the de facto offensive coordinator. They don't even have one of those in title, but they've got the pass game coordinator, Clint Kubiak, who's now going over to the Saints to be their OC. They've got, O-line coach, assistant O-line coach, running back coach, assistant running back, like up and down the line. They've got multiple coaches at each position. They've got in-game strategy type of people. They have a nickels coach who also does special teams assisting. So like they've got that robust staff that I think it gives you more eyes on problems to help find solutions. And we've talked about this plenty of times. We think the Steelers need to get with the modern ages a little bit in terms of paying more people to do more work for your football team as coaches. And I don't know that we're going to see that this offseason, but one team that I would point to right now that's going to be playing for the Lombardi Trophy on Sunday would be the 49ers, who they have arguably the best head coach in the game right now in Shanahan because of what he does offensively. But he's not saying, oh, I only need 13 or 14 assistants because I'm so good. No, they've got a whole bunch of people out there to round that out and, do all sorts of different tasks and stuff that's probably way beyond our comprehension in terms of looking at what NFL assistants do.
What's the saying? I think it's like too many chefs in the kitchen spoil the soup or something like that.
Too many cooks. Yeah.
Too many cooks in the kitchen. So like that's been a classic saying. Like
I think Tomlin has even said that maybe, or maybe he just said too many voices.
So I know that Pat Narduzzi had said that. I didn't know if Mike Tomlin had said that, but I feel like you're right. Like in today's NFL, you want more eyes on things. There's so many things to analyze, and the Steelers acknowledge like, hey, we use analytics. We just don't use it in the way that maybe some other people use it, and maybe they could use additional sets of eyes and ears in things. Look what Brian Flores did for their defense, and I know that Brian Flores is kind of an extreme example there because of his experience and everything, but Mike Vrabel, I think, is still floating out there. What could he bring to the table if you brought him in just as an extra assistant? What could more guys from college, guys like Tom Arth, who was brought up to the NFL level to be a pass game specialist for the Chargers? What if the Steelers brought in some of those innovative hires of guys like, hey, I like their system. I liked how they handled things in the college with this level of offense. Let's bring him in, get him used to the NFL, and see if we like it. If we don't, we move on and get another guy in the future years. But I think that's another way in how people build coaching staffs is finding those guys who are using these positions that they kind of create to bolster their staff instead of just hiring for every position coach, kind of way the Steelers have kept over the years.
Yeah, and the Niners are also a good example of coaching tree is, it's not insignificant. I always tell people when they bring up Tomlin's lack of one, it's like, what would you rather have, playoff wins or, coaches getting promoted at different franchises? But I mean, the Niners have been churning out a whole bunch of dudes over these last few cycles. Mike McDaniel going from whatever his role was there, again, not offensive coordinator because that's Shanahan's thing, but he goes to the Dolphins. Robert Saleh goes from their defensive coordinator to the Jets head coach. And I think their current DC, Steve Wilkes, was in the mix for some jobs again this year. We'll see. Kubiak will go to the Saints as their offensive coordinator. Those are things that just organically happen, I think, when you have more positions for coaches, whether it's, again, assistant wide receivers coach, which the Steelers don't have, assistant special teams, assistant, running backs, or just quality control entry-level stuff for young guys who might have, bright football minds and a hunger to help out whatever team employs them. So, again, I always say it's not my money. I'm not the ones paying these guys. It is different from Pat Narduzzi at Pitt to Tomlin with the Steelers. In college, you can only have so many on-field coaches. That staff is capped in the NFL. Go wild, have as many as you want. We know the Steelers are consistently on the lower end of that. I would assume that the Niners are consistently on the higher end of that, though I haven't counted every team's staffers. But, they've got a lot of them, and they've been having a lot of success for sure.
I'm right with you there on that. I think that's certainly a change we happen, and we'll see if it is a change, because the Steelers still could add more to their coaching staff. Will they? Stick with us at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We'll keep you updated all throughout the offseason. Post-Gazette.com for all the written work that we have, and follow us here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Thanks again for tuning in, everyone. We're back Monday with our thoughts here. Maybe a little bit of post-Super Bowl thoughts. I got to get on the road for Pitt versus Virginia in a huge basketball game that could, determine their.
You go to Charlottesville, Chris?
Going to Charlottesville with Noah. Noah and I are hitting the road.
I love Charlottesville. Have you been there?
No, this will be my first time.
I'll hit you up with some recommendations. That's one of my favorite ACC college towns for sure.
Ooh, I'm liking it. We're going a day early, so we'll have some time on Monday evening.
Are you a history guy? Are you going to go to Monticello?
I was thinking about it.
It's actually really cool.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. If you have time, I don't know.
We're gonna talk it out. I'm going with my boy Noah. Noah's a party animal, man. So Noah might be taking us to all the clubs.
He doesn't want to see Thomas Jefferson's old Virginia. It's funny, when I went there covering Pitt, it was a Pitt football game. One of the first people I see who is taking like the little golf cart up to the house, Paul Zeiss.
Get out of here.
I would not have thought, but Paul contains multitudes. So I wonder what he and the tour guide were talking about at Monticello.
Well, I'll find out when I'm in Charlottesville. But he's Brian Batko. I'm Chris Carter. Thanks again for tuning in for the North Shore Drive podcast. Back Monday with our post-Super Bowl thoughts here on the North Shore Drive podcast. We'll see you then right on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.